Welcome to the Stillness Broadcast. Tonight is for the thin places, the quiet seams between one moment and the next, where ordinary life frays and something patient begins to show through. Settle your shoulders, let your jaw unclench, let the room be exactly what it is, and nothing more. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. There's something profound about knowing we're scattered across the world, but gathered here in the dark together. If you find yourself returning to these stories, consider subscribing, only if it genuinely helps you. Let's begin. Story 1. The apartment smelled like paper that had never been opened. Not old paper, not mildew, not the sour sweetness of damp cardboard. This was cleaner than that, an almost sterile dryness, as if the air itself had been sifted. Vera Ashford noticed it the moment she stepped through the front door with her last box braced against her hip and her keys still warm in her palm. She stood in the narrow entryway and listened. The building made a sound the way all buildings did. Pipes ticking in the walls, a refrigerator humming somewhere below, distant footsteps that might have been in the hall or in the unit above. But beneath that, there was a soft, steady mechanical whisper that seemed too even to be accidental. It reminded her of a library's ventilation system, the constant effort of keeping paper safe. Vera was 27 and newly employed again, which still felt surreal after the last 3 months of applications and polite rejections. The job was in records management at a law firm on the east side of Providence, the kind of quiet work she liked. Tasks that could be completed, documents that could be sorted, errors that could be corrected, order as a form of mercy. This apartment, Unit 3B on Pembroke Street, was small and cheap enough to make her suspicious and grateful at the same time. The landlord, Mr. Hallstrom, had shown it to her with brisk efficiency, his hands perpetually dusted with drywall powder, as if he'd come straight from repairing something else. "No pets," he'd said immediately. "No smoking. Don't hang anything heavy on the walls." He'd paused before the last point, as if weighing whether to say something more. Vera had not asked him why. Now she set her box down on the worn parquet floor and moved through the living room, pausing at the windows. Outside, late spring rain had painted the street in dull shine. A bus hissed at the corner, doors opening like a sigh. 2 college students hurried past under a shared umbrella, shoulders pressed together. The room held the light in a way she didn't like. The corners stayed dim even when the sky brightened. There were no overhead fixtures in the living room, only a switch by the door connected to an outlet meant for a lamp. She'd brought one in already, a plain thing with a linen shade. When she plugged it in and flicked it on, the yellow light didn't feel warmer. It simply made shadows more specific. She tried to laugh at herself. She was tired. Moving did that to her, turning unfamiliar spaces into threats until the routine took hold. Vera unpacked in the methodical way she did everything. Kitchen first, then bedroom, then bathroom, each item assigned a place. She lined her mugs in a row with handles facing the same direction. She folded dish towels into squares. She stacked her notebooks by size. She set her toothbrush into the cup as if she were placing it in a rack at work. The entire time, the apartment kept smelling like unopened paper. By the evening, she'd convinced herself it was the building. Old plaster, old paint, dry wood, heated for the first time since winter. She ate dinner standing at the counter because she hadn't yet unpacked her table. The takeout container steamed a little. The food tasted like salt and convenience. At 9, she took her first shower. The water came on hot, then ran cool for a few seconds, then returned to hot again, cycling like a breathing pattern. It was only when she turned the bathroom light off and stepped back into the hallway that she saw the first thing that didn't fit. On the far wall of the hallway near the bedroom door, there was a narrow rectangle of slightly different paint, subtle but visible once noticed. A patch, a repair. In the center of it, almost invisible unless she angled her head, a faint seam outlined a door-shaped shape. A door that wasn't there. Vera stood with her towel pressed to her hair, water dripping down her back. She took one slow step toward the wall. The seam didn't change. No knob, no frame, just a suggestion of a doorway in plaster. Old repairs, she told herself. Nothing more. She went to bed early and slept in half-waking pieces. The mattress felt too firm, the sheet too crisp. Outside, rain tapped the window like fingertips testing glass. Sometime after midnight, she woke to the sound of paper turning. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just there. A soft, careful riffle, like someone leafing through a book very slowly. Vera lay still, breath held in the dark. She listened for the next sound, the confirmation of human movement. There was none, only the continuing deliberate turning of pages. She turned on her bedside lamp. The light carved the room into corners. Her moving boxes sat stacked along one wall like silent witnesses. The sound stopped the moment the lamp clicked on, as if it had been waiting for her to notice. Vera sat up, heart beating too hard for the quiet. She told herself it had been the rain, the building, her imagination smoothing odd sounds into familiar shapes. She left the lamp on and slept again, but shallowly, her body never fully trusting the dark. The next morning at work, she felt the apartment's air clinging to her clothes. Paper scent, dry and old. The law firm smelled of coffee and toner and cologne. Her supervisor, Marla Sutton, a woman with immaculate bangs and a voice that never rose, gave her a stack of files and a password. Just keep it consistent, Marla said. Consistency is everything. People fear missing documents more than they fear bad news. Vera smiled because it sounded like a joke, but Marla didn't. In the afternoon, Vera's phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Hallstrom. "Everything okay?" Vera stared at the message for a moment, unsettled by the timing. She typed back that everything was fine. "Thank you, just settling in." A minute later, another text arrived. "Don't put anything in the hallway wall. If you find it. If you find it." Vera's fingers tightened around her phone. She nearly replied asking what he meant, but her instinct, old, practiced, told her that asking questions invited answers you might not want. She typed, "Understood." That night, she returned to the apartment and stood in the hallway looking at the faint seam again. She leaned close, pressing her fingertips to the paint. The wall was cool, smooth. Nothing gave under pressure. No hidden latch, no draft. Still, she could smell the unopened paper more strongly there, as if the wall itself was made of books. She tried to shake it off. She cooked pasta. She watched a show on her laptop with the volume low. She folded her clothes and placed them in drawers. Routine. She built a life out of routine, because routine was one of the few things that never demanded belief. At 3:12 a.m. she woke again. The page turning had returned, but now there was another sound threaded through it. A soft ticking, like a small clock. Vera sat up. The room was dark. The sound seemed to come from the hallway. She got out of bed. Her feet found cold floor. The air tasted faintly of dust. In the hallway, her bedroom door opened behind her. She listened. The turning pages sounded close now, as if someone were standing on the other side of the plaster, reading in the hidden space within. The ticking was steady, patient. Vera took one step toward the patched area on the wall. The smell intensified, sharp as a paper cut. She raised her hand and pressed her palm flat against the seam. The wall vibrated. Not like pipes, not like plumbing, like something moving on the other side. A slow, deliberate shifting, as if a large object were being slid across a floor. The page turning continued, unhurried. Vera pulled her hand away, suddenly nauseated. She backed into the living room and turned on the lamp by the couch. Yellow light filled the space, thin and unimpressive. The page turning stopped. For several seconds, there was nothing but the building's ordinary noise. Then, softly, a sound came from the hallway. A single knock. 1, 2, 3. Not on her door, on the wall. Vera stood very still. She waited, as if waiting would turn it into a coincidence. A fourth knock came, slower, placed with care. And then something else, a voice muffled, as though filtered through thick paper. Vera Ashford, it said. Her name pronounced correctly, with the small emphasis on the first syllable, the way her mother used to say it. She did not answer. She could not. The voice continued, patient. You have misfiled, it said. You have left something unreturned. Vera's mouth went dry. She took a step backward until her calf touched the couch. I don't know what you mean, she managed, her voice thinner than she wanted. Silence, then slowly, as though turning a page, the voice spoke again. You will. The lamp flickered once and steadied. Vera realized she was shaking. She slept on the couch with the lamp on, and her phone in her hand, thumb resting on the emergency call screen. No more knocks came, no more voices. But she dreamed of endless hallways lined with shelves, the air so dry it cracked her lips, and in every aisle a door-shaped seam that pulsed like a vein. In the morning, Vera went to work early. She avoided looking at her phone until she reached her desk. There were no messages from Mr. Hallstrom, no missed calls, nothing to anchor the night to reality. Marla handed her a new set of files. We're behind, she said. A client wants everything from the 80s digitized by next week. Vera sat down and began. The work should have been soothing. The stacks of paper, the orderly process, the clean satisfaction of turning disarray into structure. But every time she turned a page, she felt her throat tighten. By noon, her eyes were tired. She went to the break room and poured coffee, then didn't drink it. The smell of paper had followed her here, faint and wrong. Her co-worker, Jonah Fielding, a man with kind eyes and a habit of tapping his pen against his teeth, nodded at her. New place treating you okay? He asked. Vera hesitated. It's quiet. Quiet is good, Jonah said. Then, as if remembering something, he lowered his voice. Hallstrom still renting out Pembroke? Yes. Vera kept her tone neutral. Jonah's expression tightened slightly. My cousin lived there years ago, left in a hurry. Why? Jonah shrugged, but it wasn't casual. He said the walls made him feel watched, like living inside a file cabinet. Vera's coffee cup trembled in her hand. She set it down carefully. That afternoon, she tried to make herself go to the firm's archive room, a small locked space in the basement where older physical files were stored before scanning. She'd been told she could access it if needed. She found the keycard on Marla's desk and hesitated. The smell of paper grew stronger as she approached the basement stairs. A rational person would have turned around. Vera didn't consider herself irrational, But she had always been a person who needed to see the source of a thing, to name it, to file it correctly. The basement hallway was cooler and quieter, sound swallowed by concrete. The archive room door opened with a soft beep. Inside, metal shelves formed narrow aisles. Boxes sat stacked, labeled in clean block letters. The air was dry, conditioned, protective, and in the far corner, half hidden behind a shelf, Vera saw a door. Not a wall seam, not a patch, an actual door, narrow and plain, its paint the same off-white as the archive room walls. No sign, no handle visible from this angle. Vera's breath caught. She stepped closer, heart hammering. The door had a handle after all, a small brass knob that didn't quite match anything else in the room. The knob looked older than the building. As Vera approached, the smell of unopened paper became overpowering, crowding her sinuses. It felt like breathing dust. She reached for the knob. Her fingers touched cold brass. The door clicked before she turned it, as if it had been waiting. Vera snatched her hand back. The sound of paper turning came from the other side, fast, fluttering, like a frantic search. She stepped back, nearly bumping into a shelf. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. Return it. Vera stared at the screen. Her skin prickled with heat and cold at once. She typed, "Return what?" The reply came immediately. The missing page. Vera's mind raced. Files, documents, records. She thought of every folder she'd handled since starting. Every scanned page, every staple removed and replaced. She had been careful. She always was. Unless something had slipped. A page stuck to another. A sheet left behind in a scanner tray. A document misfiled into the wrong box. She backed away from the door and fled the archive room, pulling it shut behind her. The beep of the lock sounded too loud in the basement quiet. Upstairs, fluorescent office lights made her eyes ache. She returned to her desk and began checking her work like a surgeon checking stitches, opening scanned PDFs, verifying page counts, comparing them to physical folders. By 4 o'clock, she found it, a single sheet of paper, thin and almost translucent, stuck to the underside of her desk drawer. It must have clung there by static. How it had gotten there, she didn't know, but she recognized the letterhead, the firm's old logo, used decades ago. The page was blank. No text, no signature, just an empty sheet of paper that felt subtly warm when she touched it, like it had been held. On the back, in faint gray ink, a single line of typed text appeared as she watched, letters forming slowly as if an invisible typewriter were striking them. This page was never meant to be seen. Vera's throat closed. She stared until her eyes watered. She put the page in a manila folder and walked it to Marla's office, intending to ask what the hell it was. Marla looked up, her face calm and unreadable. "What is it?" Vera held out the folder with shaking hands. "I found this. It was stuck under my desk. It belongs to a file I scanned, but it's blank." Marla did not touch it. She looked at Vera's face instead, taking in the fear with clinical attention. "Where do you live?" Marla asked. Vera felt a chill run through her. "Why?" Marla's voice remained even. "Because if you live where I think you live, you need to take that page home and put it back." Vera swallowed. "On Pembroke Street." Marla exhaled through her nose, a small sound of annoyance or resignation. "I told Hallstrom not to rent to anyone who works with records," she said quietly, as if to herself. Then louder, "Listen to me, Vera. Go home before dark. Don't stop anywhere. Don't show anyone that page. Don't throw it away. Don't copy it. put it back where it wants to go." Vera's mind stuttered. "What do you mean, where it wants to go?" Marla's eyes, for the first time, held something human. Fear, edged with fatigue. "You'll understand," she said. "And if you're smart, you won't try to understand more than that." Vera left the office early. The rain had stopped. The sky had that washed-out post-storm brightness that made everything look too clean. On the bus ride home, she kept the folder pressed to her chest. Her heart beat against it, steady and loud. The closer she got to Pembroke Street, the stronger the paper smell became, as if the neighborhood air itself had changed. By the time she reached her building, the smell was so strong it made her eyes sting. Inside, the hallway light buzzed. Vera climbed to the third floor and stopped outside her door. A new seam had appeared on the wall opposite her unit. Not the faint patch she'd seen before, but a cleaner outline, as if the wall had decided to reveal itself more honestly. A door shape with a suggestion of a frame. And now, in the center where a knob should be, a small circular bulge under the paint. Vera's hand shook. She unlocked her apartment and stepped inside. The air smelled of paper and something else. Faintly metallic, like old staples. She set the folder on the kitchen counter and stood in the living room, trying to force her breathing to slow. The wall in the hallway knocked once. Vera flinched. She didn't move. A second knock. Then the voice, clearer now, still muffled as though spoken through a stack of documents. "Return it," it said. "Return it, Vera Ashford." Vera took the folder and walked into the hallway. She stopped in front of the patched wall. The seam was sharper now. The bulge where a knob would be pressed outward slightly, like a bruise. She placed the folder against the wall. Nothing happened. The voice sighed, a sound like pages settling. "Not like that," it said. Vera's stomach twisted. "Then how?" The wall was silent for a moment, as if listening. Then, with a faint click, a line split down the seam, and the door appeared in full. Not materializing from nothing, but revealing itself as if the wall had been a curtain drawn back. The paint seam became a frame. The bulge became a brass knob. The door opened inward a fraction, releasing a gust of dry air that tasted like dust and ink. Beyond was darkness, not the darkness of an unlit room, a thicker darkness, like space where light did not travel. And the smell, unopened paper and something older, something like the inside of a book that had been sealed for centuries. Vera's knees wanted to buckle. She gripped the folder harder. "I just put it inside?" she asked, voice small. "Yes," the voice said. "And you will close the door?" Vera leaned forward. The darkness beyond the doorway seemed to pull at her skin, like a pressure difference. She could hear the page turning clearly now, and beneath it a faint ticking that sounded like a clock counting down. She slid the folder into the darkness, arm extended. The air on the other side was cold, dry enough to chap her fingertips. Something brushed the folder. It wasn't a hand. It was too smooth, too broad, like a book cover sliding against paper. Vera froze. Her throat tightened until she could barely breathe. The folder disappeared from her grip, pulled gently, efficiently, as if filed. She snatched her hand back and slammed the door shut. The knob clicked. The seam faded. The wall became wall again. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then Vera's phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Hallstrom. "Good. Now don't open it again." Vera's hands went numb. She stared at the message until the letters blurred. That night, she slept in her bed with the lamp on and her back pressed to the far wall. The apartment's paper smell receded slightly, as if satisfied. In the early hours, she woke to a different sound, Not page turning, not knocking. A soft scraping at her bedroom door, like a finger tracing the edge of wood. Vera lay still, listening. The scraping stopped. Then a voice, not muffled now, but thin and close, as if spoken from inside the room. "Vera," it whispered. Her skin went cold. She sat up and turned her head toward the corner near her closet. The air in that corner looked wrong. Not a shadow. Something denser, as if the darkness had weight. And in that weight, she saw the suggestion of a shape that was not a person, but could imitate one. A tall outline with angles too sharp. Like a figure made from folded paper. It did not move. It simply stood, attentive. Vera realized with slow horror that the door in the hallway was not the only entrance. It was a filing system, a way of storing what shouldn't exist. And now that she'd returned the page, it knew her as someone who could be used. In the corner, the folded paper shape tilted its head, as if reading her. Then, in Vera's mind, not as words, but as understanding, came a simple message. "Next time, we will need more." Vera closed her eyes. She tried to breathe. She tried to tell herself she was dreaming. But the smell of unopened paper filled her lungs, and she knew she was awake. When she opened her eyes again, the corner was empty. The air was quiet. Her phone buzzed once more, a calendar notification she hadn't set. Appointment, return, time, 3:12 a.m. Repeats, weekly. Vera stared at the screen until dawn bled pale light into the room, and the apartment smelled briefly like ordinary air, but she could still feel the weight of attention in the walls, patient as paper, waiting to be filed. Story 2. At 5:18 a.m., Felix Rourke heard the silence change. Not the absence of sound. He lived with that every morning in the hour before the city truly woke. But a shift in the way. Quiet sat in a room. The kind of quiet that arrives when a crowd notices something is wrong and stops talking at once. Felix sat up in bed and listened. His apartment in Queens was on the 4th floor of a building that always held noise. Radiators knocking, neighbors arguing through thin walls, the distant rumble of early trains. But now there was a clean, unnatural hush, as if someone had turned down the world. He was 64, retired from 30 years as a locksmith, and he had never gotten used to mornings. His sleep came in odd blocks, his body still obeying decades of night calls and emergency lockouts. He wore his age the way he wore his work, with quiet endurance and small, practical habits. He swung his feet over the side of the bed and felt cold air on his shins. The room smelled faintly of metal and citrus, his cleaning solution, the one he used on his tools, even though he no longer needed them for work. Habit again. The silence held. Felix rose and padded into the kitchen. The light over the sink flickered once when he turned it on, then steadied. On the counter, his keys lay where he always left them. A ring with 3 keys, one for his apartment, one for the building, one for the old storage locker he'd never bothered to empty. The keys looked wrong, not shifted, not moved. Wrong in the way a familiar face can look wrong when you suddenly notice it's older than it should be. The metal seemed duller, the teeth slightly different. Felix leaned close. His breath fogged the cool air. Hanging from the keyring was a 4th key. It was not his. The key was long and narrow, old brass with a bow shaped like a thin oval. It had no plastic head, no modern cut. It looked like the kind of key that belonged to a door with a heavy lock and a history. Felix stared at it for a long moment, his mind searching for the simplest explanation. Had he picked up someone else's keys by mistake? Impossible. The ring was his, worn smooth from years in his pocket. He touched the strange key. It was cold enough to sting. His fingertips tingled as if they'd brushed ice. The silence deepened, pressing at his ears. He could hear his own pulse, and beneath it a faint, low hum, as if a distant engine were idling somewhere inside the building. Felix removed the key from the ring. It resisted for a moment, like it didn't want to separate, then slipped free with a small click. The instant it left the ring, the silence snapped. Sound returned in a rush. The radiator's hiss, a distant car horn, footsteps above. Felix stood in the kitchen, key in hand, and felt his stomach drop. He had worked with locks and keys his entire life. He knew weight. He knew metal. He knew when something belonged. This key felt like it belonged to the building itself. Felix tried to be sensible. He made coffee. He sat at the small table by the window. He watched the street wake slowly. A delivery truck. A woman walking fast with a tote bag. An older man sweeping the sidewalk in front of the bodega. The key lay on the table. It looked almost ordinary in daylight, but when the sun shifted behind clouds, it gleamed as if lit from within. Felix told himself he would throw it away. He did not. At 7 a.m., he went downstairs to check the lobby. He'd lived in this building for 12 years and knew its quirks. The elevator that jerked between floors. The front door that stuck in winter. The lobby was empty. The mailboxes lined the wall, scratched and dented. The front door's lock plate shone dully. Felix glanced at the maintenance door near the back, the one that led to the basement. It was usually propped open for the super in the mornings. Today, it was closed. A brass lock had been installed on it overnight. Felix stopped, a slow chill spreading through him. He walked closer. The lock was old, older than the building. Its face was engraved with a pattern that looked like vine work until you stared too long. And then it looked like letters in a language you almost remembered. There was no keyhole in the usual sense. The keyway was an oval slot that matched the shape of the key he held. Felix's mouth went dry. He turned and looked toward the lobby windows. Outside, the street moved normally. People walked. Cars passed. Nothing in the world suggested that the building had changed. Behind him, the maintenance door sat quietly, as if holding its breath. Felix's instincts, honed by decades of emergency calls, told him something simple. Do not open doors or you didn't lock yourself. He turned away. The elevator dinged behind him. The doors slid open with a soft shudder. Inside the elevator stood a woman Felix had never seen before. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, wearing a light coat and holding a paper bag. Her hair was dark, pulled back tightly. Her face was calm, but her eyes looked tired in a way that suggested sleeplessness rather than age. She smiled politely. Going up? Felix hesitated, then stepped in. The elevator smelled faintly of damp carpet and something metallic, like pennies. The woman glanced at the key in Felix's hand. Her eyes flicked to it, in a way so quickly he might have imagined it. You're holding it already, she said, almost to herself. Felix's heart thumped. Holding what? She looked at him fully now. Her expression didn't change, but something in her gaze sharpened. The spare, she said. Felix's fingers tightened around the key. I don't know what you're talking about. The elevator rose. The building's hum deepened slightly, as if listening. The woman's voice softened. If it showed up for you, it means the lock is awake. Felix felt anger flare, small, defensive. What are you, the super's friend? Is this some kind of prank? The woman shook her head. My name is Margot Strand. I moved out of 2A last month. I came back because I couldn't stop thinking about it. Felix swallowed. He knew 2A. It had been empty for weeks, the unit's windows dark. "What is it?" he asked. Margot's eyes moved past Felix, past his shoulder, as if checking whether the elevator itself had ears. "It's a door," she said. "One that doesn't always exist." Felix's breath caught. The elevator dinged at the 4th floor. The doors opened. Margot stepped out, then paused. She looked back at Felix. "If you open it," she said, "don't go alone." The doors closed between them. Felix stood in the elevator with the key in his hand and the sudden certainty that he was not the first person to hold it. He returned to his apartment and spent the morning trying to behave normally. He watched the news. He washed dishes. He rearranged a drawer of old receipts just to feel like he was doing something that made sense. But every few minutes, the silence would shift again. The clean, unnatural hush, and Felix would glance at the key and feel his stomach turn. By noon, he couldn't stand it. He went down to the lobby. The brass lock on the maintenance door gleamed faintly, as if pleased. Felix stared at it for a long time. Then he went upstairs, grabbed his jacket, and left the building. He walked 2 blocks to a small diner and sat in a booth by the window. The place smelled of coffee, fried eggs, and bleach. He took out his phone and stared at it. He had no idea who to call. He didn't have family nearby. Most of his old friends had moved or died or become people he didn't recognize. He thought of Margot Strand. He searched the building's tenant board in his mind, but her name hadn't been there. Maybe it had, and he'd never noticed. He remembered her face. That was something. Felix returned to the building and knocked on 2A. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Footsteps, a chain sliding. The door opened a crack. A man stood behind it, mid-30s, hair messy, wearing a t-shirt with a faded band logo. His eyes were wary. "Yeah?" the man asked. "I'm Felix," Felix said. "I live in 4C. I'm sorry. I know this is strange. But did Margot Strand live here before you?" The man's expression shifted subtly, like a muscle tightening. "Who?" he asked. Felix felt the silence change again, faintly like a warning. "Margot," Felix said. "She said she moved out last month." The man stared for a moment, then shook his head. "No one lived here before me. It was empty for a year. That's why I got it cheap." Felix's stomach turned. "That's not true." The man's eyes hardened. "Look, I don't know what you want. If you're trying to sell me something..." Felix backed away. "Sorry, forget it." He walked down the hall, hearing the man's door close behind him with a solid finality. Back in his apartment, Felix sat at the table and held the key. His hands, usually steady, trembled slightly. If Margot Strand had existed, someone should remember her. Unless the building didn't want her remembered. At 5:18 p.m., the silence shifted again. Felix stood and moved to his door. He listened in the hallway. No footsteps, no voices. The building felt empty, though he knew people lived here. He went downstairs. The lobby was empty. The maintenance door waited, brass lock gleaming. Felix stood before it with the key in his hand, his heart hammering. He thought of his years as a locksmith, of doors opened at 2 in the morning for people who'd locked themselves out of their own lives. He'd always believed doors were neutral. You opened them. You closed them. They did not choose. He slid the key into the oval slot. The lock accepted it with a smoothness that felt intimate, like a mouth. The silence deepened so quickly Felix's ears popped. Then the lock turned on its own. The door swung inward. A smell rolled out. Cold concrete and old water, yes, but also something else. a sterile, papery dryness that made Felix think of untouched archives and sealed boxes. The basement stairs descended into darkness that seemed thicker than it should. Felix stepped in, one hand on the doorframe. The air inside the stairwell felt different, heavier, as if it had been compressed. He took one step down. The door behind him clicked shut. Felix spun and grabbed the knob. It did not turn. He swallowed and forced himself to breathe. He was not a young man. Panic would not help. Panic never helped. He descended slowly, one step at a time. The darkness swallowed the faint lobby light. Halfway down, the air changed again. A faint hum appeared, like a distant electrical current. At the bottom, Felix's shoes touched concrete. He reached for the light switch on the wall by instinct. There was no switch. The basement was not the basement he knew. There were no exposed pipes, no old laundry machines, no storage cages. Instead, the space opened into a long corridor lined with doors on both sides. Each door was plain, painted a dull gray, with an oval keyhole matching the one he'd used. The corridor stretched farther than the building's footprint could allow. It was too long. It shouldn't fit. The hum deepened. Felix took a step forward. His footsteps echoed strangely, as if the corridor was larger than it looked. The air smelled like metal and paper and something faintly sweet like glue. He approached the nearest door. A small brass plaque was mounted at eye level. It read, Felix Rourke, age 64, locksmith. Felix's skin went cold. He moved to the next door. Margot Strand, age 40, nurse. Felix's throat tightened. He turned quickly, scanning down the corridor. Every door had a name, not just names, details, ages, occupations. Sometimes beneath the plaque, a second line in smaller text. Moved out, evicted, missing, removed. Felix stumbled backward, heart pounding. He looked at the door labeled with his own name. The hum seemed to pulse, as if responding to his attention. Felix leaned close to his door. He placed his ear to the wood. On the other side, he heard sound. Not voices, not footsteps. A faint, steady breathing, slow and patient, as if someone were asleep close to the door. Felix jerked back. His mouth tasted like pennies. He looked down at the key in his hand. It gleamed faintly, warm now, as if held by something else. "Hello?" he called, voice echoing down the corridor. The sound of his voice seemed wrong here. It made the hum waver, then sharpen. A door farther down the corridor clicked. Felix froze. Another click, then another, each like a small mechanical decision. Doors were unlocking. Felix backed away, scanning for the stairs for any sign of exit. Behind him, the corridor stretched into dimness. He turned and ran. His footsteps sounded too loud, too slow, as if the air resisted movement. The corridor seemed to lengthen as he ran, doors passing in a blur of names. He reached the end where the stairs should be. There was only another door. Plain gray. Oval keyhole. No plaque. Felix grabbed the knob and tried it. Locked. Behind him, the clicking continued, closer now, doors opening in sequence like teeth parting. Felix pressed his forehead to the cold door. His breath came fast. The air tasted dry, like old paper in the back of his throat. He raised the key. His hands shook. He tried to slide it into the oval keyhole, but the key didn't fit, because it was the wrong key. Of course it was. The key had brought him here, but it wasn't meant to let him leave. Behind him, the first door opened with a soft sigh. Felix turned slowly. In the doorway stood someone shaped like a person, but wrong. A figure in a maintenance uniform, face indistinct, as if blurred by frosted glass. It did not step out. It simply stood, listening. Felix felt the silence shift again, deeper than ever. pressing in his ears until he heard only his own blood. The figure's mouth moved without sound, but in Felix's mind, he understood a message as clearly as if spoken. "You opened the lock. Now you belong to the hall." Felix's knees weakened. He clutched the key tighter until it bit into his palm. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "I just wanted to know." The figure tilted its head, as if curious. A second door opened farther down. Another blurred figure appeared. Different height, different shape. It, too, did not step out. It only watched. Felix realized the corridor wasn't just storage. It was occupancy. A building's secret archive of everyone it had kept. He backed against the locked door. Nowhere to go. The figures began to emerge from their doorways, not walking forward, but simply appearing closer, as if distance didn't work the same here. Felix squeezed his eyes shut. When he opened them again, he was standing in his lobby. The maintenance door was closed. The brass lock was gone. The air smelled like old carpet and winter coats. The elevator dinged. Felix stood in the center of the lobby, stunned, heart pounding. He looked down. The key was still in his hand, but now, attached to it, was a small brass tag stamped with letters. Felix Rourke Spare. Felix swallowed hard, tasting metal. He hurried upstairs and locked his apartment door behind him, then slid the chain. He sat at his kitchen table with the key in front of him and stared at it for a long time. The building was noisy again, normal. But Felix could feel the corridor behind the walls now the way you can feel a toothache before the pain fully arrives. At 5:18 a.m. the next morning, the silence changed again. Felix did not get out of bed. He stayed still, listening. And when he heard the soft click of a lock turning somewhere in the building, he pulled the blanket up to his chin like it could protect him from the fact that he had been tagged. And the worst part was the calm certainty settling in his bones. One day, when the lock decided, the spare would be used. Story 3. Silas Merrick's first mistake was believing that a map could be wrong. He was 34, a cartographer for a small tech company that specialized in trail navigation, and his whole life was built around the idea that space could be understood if you measured it carefully enough. A path was a line. A boundary was a boundary. A river didn't move overnight. A mountain didn't change shape because you weren't looking. He drove north into the Adirondacks on a bright summer Saturday with his phone in airplane mode and a folded paper map on the passenger seat. The kind of souvenir map that made him feel comforted by its simplicity. He'd been invited to a weekend retreat by a coworker, Tobias Caldwell, who said it would be good for him to get out of the city and reset. Silas hadn't wanted to go. He'd recently ended a relationship that had lasted long enough to leave grooves in his habits. His apartment felt too quiet now. His nights were full of scrolling and shallow sleep. So he drove. The cabin Tobias had rented sat on the edge of a lake with a name Silas didn't recognize. The road that led to it was narrow and lined with pines that smelled sharp and resinous in the heat. The air tasted like sap and sun-warmed dirt. When Silas arrived, Tobias greeted him on the porch with a grin and a drink in hand. Tobias was 46, an easy man with a warm laugh and an uncanny ability to make people feel included. "Made it," Tobias said, clapping Silas on the shoulder. "No getting lost, right, Mr. Maps?" Silas forced a smile. "Not yet." Inside, the cabin was clean and comfortably rustic. Wood paneling, a stone fireplace. Woven rugs. The windows looked out over the lake, its surface smooth as glass. Tobias's friends were already there. Esme Thorne, a yoga instructor in her late 20s with bright eyes and calm speech, and Bernard Lockhart, Tobias's older brother, 71, a retired engineer with sharp eyebrows and a habit of correcting people's word choice. They ate dinner on the porch while the sun turned the lake orange. Mosquitoes buzzed in the air. Bernard complained about them and slapped his arms with annoyed precision. Silas tried to relax. He really did. That night, he slept on the cabin's pull-out couch. The air was warm, the kind of heat that made the world feel thick. He could hear lake water lapping softly against the shore. A loon called somewhere in the darkness, its voice like a question. He fell asleep thinking about lines on a map and how comfortingly permanent they were. At 2:11 a.m., Silas woke to the sound of someone moving outside. Not footsteps, a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across wood. He sat up, heart suddenly awake. The cabin was dark. The air smelled faintly of smoke from the fireplace. The dragging sound continued, slow and deliberate. Silas rose quietly and padded to the window. He pressed his forehead to the glass. Outside, in the moonlight, he could see Tobias on the porch. Tobias stood barefoot, wearing sleep shorts and a shirt. He was bent over, pulling something long across the porch boards. At first, Silas thought it was a rope. Then he realized it was chalk. Tobias was drawing, a thick white line carefully placed, running around the edge of the porch like a border. Silas watched, confused and uneasy. Tobias's movements were slow and purposeful, like someone working from memory. When the line was complete, Tobias stood and looked out at the lake. He lifted his hand and, with two fingers, traced a shape in the air as if outlining something invisible. Then he went back inside. The moment the cabin door shut, the dragging sound stopped. Silas stood at the window for a long time, heart pounding, trying to decide what he had seen. In the morning, Tobias was cheerful and normal. He made eggs. He laughed at Bernard's complaints. He asked Silas if he'd slept well. Silas hesitated, then said, "I saw you outside last night." Tobias's smile didn't change, but his eyes sharpened slightly. "Did you?" "You were drawing a line on the porch," Silas said. Bernard looked up from his coffee. Esme's expression stayed calm, but her fingers tightened around her mug. Tobias nodded slowly. "Right. You saw that." Silas waited for an explanation that made sense. Tobias set down his fork. "This place does something," he said quietly. "It makes corrections." Bernard snorted. "Don't spook him, Toby." "I'm not," Tobias said. His voice stayed gentle. "Silas, what do you do for work?" "I make maps," Silas said. "I design." "I know," Tobias said. "That's why I invited you." Silas felt cold spread through him despite the summer warmth. "Why?" Tobias leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Because this lake doesn't like to be mapped." Silas laughed once reflexively. "That's not a thing." Bernard's gaze was hard. "It is here." Esme spoke softly. "It's like the place resents being defined." Silas stared at them. "You're serious?" Tobias nodded. "Last year, I came up here alone, just to get away. I like quiet, you know. I like to fish. The second night, I got turned around walking back from the shore. I'd walked the same path 10 times. Suddenly, it wasn't there." Silas felt a tightness in his chest. "You got lost. I got corrected," Tobias said. "I looked down at the dirt, and there were footprints, my footprints, leading away from the cabin. But they weren't mine. The spacing was wrong. The stride was too long." Bernard tapped his mug with a fingernail. "The lake keeps what it wants. It returns what it doesn't. You don't argue with it. You draw a line. You remind it where you are. Silas's stomach rolled. Why come back then? Tobias smiled sadly. Because I think it's beautiful, and because some part of me wants to know it better. That's the trap, I guess. Silas looked at his folded paper map on the counter. It suddenly seemed childish. Later that day, Silas walked down to the lake with Esme. The air was hot, the sunlight sharp. The water looked inviting and ordinary. Esme carried a small pouch of chalk. She didn't mention it. She just held it like it belonged. They stood at the shore. Silas watched the water. It was so still he could see the clouds reflected perfectly. This doesn't look like anything, he said, trying to sound light. Esme smiled without humor. That's how it keeps you from noticing. Silas frowned. Noticing what? Esme pointed. Look at the reflection. Silas looked harder. The clouds, the trees, the sky, all reflected. But the cabin wasn't. He turned and looked behind them. The cabin stood on its small rise, visible through the trees. He looked back at the water. No cabin, no porch, nothing that suggested human presence. A cold prickling ran up his arms. Esme's voice was soft. It doesn't like mirrors. Silas swallowed. Why? Esme shook her head. I don't know, but I know it watches its edges. Silas crouched and dipped his fingers into the water. It was colder than it should have been for a sunny summer day. The chill sank into his bones. When he pulled his hand out, his fingertips tingled numb. On his skin, a thin white line had appeared, like chalk dust tracing across his knuckles. Silas stared. He rubbed at it. It didn't smear. It didn't come off. Esme watched with quiet concern. Don't touch the water again, she said. Silas's heart pounded. What is this? Esme's eyes were steady. A mark. That evening, Bernard insisted on a hike. It's daylight, Bernard said, impatient. If we're going to be scared of everything, we might as well stay in bed. Tobias protested mildly, but Bernard was stubborn in the way old men can be when their bodies begin betraying them. He wanted movement, proof of control. They walked a trail through tall pines. The air smelled of needles and warm bark. Birds chattered overhead. It felt normal. It felt safe. Silas tried to relax, but his fingers kept brushing the chalk line on his knuckles, as if checking whether it had changed. After an hour, they reached a small clearing with a view of the lake. The water gleamed in the fading light. Bernard walked to the edge of the clearing and pointed. That's where we are, he said. See? Not lost. Silas looked. From here, the lake was farther away, framed by trees but visible. He glanced down at his paper map, unable to resist. The map showed the lake's outline as a simple shape with a trail marked along its northern edge. Silas looked at the lake in reality. The shoreline did not match. It wasn't dramatically different, just enough. A small bay where the map showed a smooth curve, a narrow finger of land that wasn't on paper. Silas's pulse quickened. He told himself the souvenir map was inaccurate, simple, tourist grade. But then he realized something worse. The lake's shape had changed since this morning. He remembered the line of the shore from the porch view. He had stared at it while drinking coffee. He was sure. Now the water extended farther into the trees, as if it had decided to take more land. Tobias stood beside him, face tight. We need to go back, he said. Bernard scoffed. You're imagining it. The wind shifted. The air cooled suddenly. A faint silence pressed in. The same unnatural hush Felix had felt in his building, the same hush Vera had felt before the knocks. The birds stopped. Silas's mouth went dry. From the trees behind them came a sound like paper tearing. A long rip, slow and deliberate. They all turned. Between the trunks where shadows layered, Silas saw something pale move, flat, vertical, like a sheet of paper slipping between worlds. Esme whispered, "Don't look at it too long." But Silas couldn't stop. The pale shape unfolded. It wasn't paper. It was the idea of paper. Thin and tall and impossibly smooth. It moved as if a flat surface could breathe. And as it shifted, Silas realized it was not emerging from the trees. It was emerging from the space between them, from the distance that shouldn't be occupied by anything. Bernard took one step forward, stubborn even now. "What the hell is that?" he demanded. The pale shape paused. Then, in the same way a map can redraw a boundary, the world changed. The clearing's edge slid outward. The trees seemed to step back. The lake shoreline crept closer. Silas felt the ground shift under his feet, not physically, but conceptually, as if the definition of where he stood had been edited. He grabbed Tobias's arm. "Run," he whispered. Tobias didn't argue. He turned, and they ran back down the trail. Bernard ran too, cursing under his breath. His breath came ragged. Esme moved quickly, almost silently. Behind them, the sound of paper tearing followed like a slow, patient laugh. They reached the cabin just as the last light faded. Tobias fumbled for chalk and drew the thick line around the porch again, hands shaking. Bernard stood in the doorway, chest heaving. "This is insane," he said. "We're tired. Tobias slammed the door shut. "No," he said, voice sharp now. "We don't talk like that here." Silas stared at Tobias. "Why?" Tobias swallowed. "Because it listens for definitions," he said. "If you name it wrong, it corrects you." Silas's skin prickled. "Corrects how?" Esme's voice was barely above a whisper. "By moving the lines." That night they stayed inside with every light on. Tobias insisted they not open windows. Bernard paced, muttering. Esme sat cross-legged on the floor with her chalk pouch in her lap, eyes closed as if meditating. Silas sat at the table with the paper map spread out. He couldn't stop looking at it. His mind kept trying to reconcile lines with reality. At midnight, the cabin lights flickered. The hum of silence pressed in again. Silas looked up. The paper map on the table began to change. Not dramatically, not with visible ink spilling, but the shoreline lines subtly shifted, crawling like a living thing. The trail line wavered and moved away from the cabin, bending toward the lake. Silas's breath caught. "It's rewriting the map," he whispered. Tobias's face went pale. "Put it away." Silas shook his head. "Why? It's just paper." Esme's eyes opened, sharp. "It's not just paper. It's a claim." The map's lines continued moving. The cabin's little marker, an icon of a house, slid an inch toward the lake. Silas's chest tightened. He realized with sudden clarity that the map wasn't describing the place anymore. It was being used to decide it. And as a cartographer, as someone who made claims about space, Silas had done the worst possible thing. He had brought his authority here. He had given the lake a language it could use. Silas grabbed the map and tried to fold it shut, but the paper resisted, stiffening like muscle. The smell of sap vanished, replaced by dry paper and something sharp like printer ink. The cabin lights went out. Total darkness. In the dark, the hum deepened until it was a pressure in Silas's teeth. The air thickened. The world felt held. Somewhere inside the cabin, a sound like a pen scratching on paper began. Esme whispered, "Don't speak." Bernard's breath came in harsh pulls. Tobias's hand found Silas's arm and gripped hard. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate, like someone writing a new line. Silas's mind filled with images. The shoreline creeping, the cabin sliding closer to water, the definition of here shifting until here no longer included safety. In the darkness, something moved against the cabin walls. Not footsteps, not claws, a soft, smooth pressure, like paper pressed to glass. Then a voice, not spoken aloud, but understood in Silas's bones. "You drew me. Now I can move." Silas's throat tightened. He wanted to apologize, to bargain, to explain he hadn't meant. But the world did not care what he meant. The light snapped back on. The cabin was unchanged. The others blinked, breathing hard. The map lay on the table, folded neatly, as if it had always been there. Silas stared at it. On the top, written in thin black ink that hadn't been there before, were two words: New Shoreline. Tobias swallowed. "We leave at dawn," he said. Bernard nodded quickly now, fear finally overriding pride. Esme's face was pale. "The line will hold until morning," she said. "Maybe." They stayed awake until the first gray light seeped into the windows. Then they packed in frantic silence. On the porch, Tobias drew one last thick chalk border. His hand shook. They got into Tobias's car and drove away. The road through the pines felt longer now, as if the forest had expanded overnight. Silas watched the lake through the trees as it disappeared behind them. The water gleamed, calm and ordinary. He told himself it was over. Then he looked down at his hands. The chalk line on his knuckles had widened, crawling up his fingers like a boundary being claimed. And when he turned his head to glance out the window, he realized something else. The road behind them did not exist in the rearview mirror. There was only trees, dense and unbroken, as if the route had been erased the moment they left. Silas stared at the empty mirror, breath shallow. Tobias glanced at him. "Don't look back," Tobias said, voice tight. Silas swallowed. He turned his eyes forward, but his mind couldn't stop drawing lines. And somewhere behind them, in the woods where the lake waited, the sound of paper tearing followed in the distance, patient and satisfied, as if the place had learned a new way to keep people from ever leaving cleanly. Story 4. Willa Blackwood's hands never stopped smelling like latex, even after she washed them, even after she scrubbed under her nails until the skin reddened, even after she sat in her car with the windows down, letting cold air sting her knuckles as if it could strip the day away. At 48, Willa had worked as a nurse long enough to know that some smells were not on the skin at all. They were in memory. They lived behind the eyes. She drove home from the hospital in Portland as the evening sky shifted from pale blue to that bruised color it gets before night. The radio played softly. She didn't hear it. Her mind replayed the day in clinical fragments, her blood pressure readings, the weight of a hand in hers, the sound of someone exhaling for the last time. She lived alone in a small duplex with peeling paint and a postage stamp yard. The neighbors were polite and distant. Willa liked it that way. She had enough of other people's need at work. She ate dinner standing at the counter. She drank water she didn't taste. Then she showered until her skin felt too tight. When she stepped out, she noticed the first message. It was on the bathroom mirror, written in condensation as if someone had breathed on the glass and traced letters with a fingertip. "Thank you for your service." Willa froze, towel clutched at her chest. The bathroom air was warm. There was no reason for condensation. She leaned close. The letters were slightly smeared, as if still damp. Willa wiped the mirror with her towel. The words vanished. Her heart beat hard. She told herself she was tired. People hallucinated after long shifts. She'd read the studies. She'd lectured new nurses about sleep. Wow, deprivation. She went to bed early. At 2:47 a.m., Willa woke to the sound of her front door unlocking. Not opening, just unlocking. The quiet click of a deadbolt turning. Willa sat up, breath held. Her bedroom door was closed. The house was dark. Then she heard footsteps in the living room, slow and careful, like someone trying not to wake her. Willa reached for her phone. Her hand trembled. The footsteps stopped outside her bedroom door. A voice spoke softly, almost kindly. "Willa Blackwood," it said. "We need you." Her throat tightened. She did not answer. The voice continued, gentle and patient. "Someone is waiting." Willa's mind flooded with images of hospital beds, call lights, patient charts. She thought of the way her life had become a series of people needing her, even at home, apparently. She forced herself to speak. "Who are you?" Silence. Then, slowly, "We are the ones who leave." Willa's stomach clenched. "Get out of my house." A soft sound, like a sigh. The footsteps retreated, moving back into the living room. Willa waited, breath shallow, listening for the front door opening. It didn't. Instead, the deadbolt clicked again, locking. From the outside, Willa's blood went cold. She threw back her covers and ran to the bedroom door. She yanked it open. The hallway was empty. The living room was dimly lit by streetlight through the curtains. The front door stood closed, deadbolt in place. Willa grabbed the lock and twisted. It wouldn't turn. Her fingers slipped on metal. Panic rose fast, hot in her throat. She tried the chain. She didn't have one. She ran to the kitchen window, shoved it up. It opened an inch, then stopped, as if caught on something. She shoved harder. The window did not move. Her breath came fast. The house felt suddenly sealed, too quiet. Willa stood in the living room and tried to make her mind work. She was a nurse. She was trained for emergencies. She knew how to handle panic in others. Now she was alone in her own home with the clear certainty that someone had locked her in. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A notification. New shift available. Location unknown. Accept. Willa stared at the screen. Her phone had no scheduling app like that. She hadn't installed anything. She hit decline. The screen flickered and the same notification appeared again. Accept. Willa's mouth went dry. She hit decline again. Again it returned. The house lights flickered. In the brief darkness between flickers, Willa saw something in the hallway. A figure tall and still, standing where the hallway met the living room. It looked like a person in a long coat, but the outline was too smooth, too uniform. It did not move. The lights returned. The hallway was empty. Willa's heart hammered. She squeezed her eyes shut, then opened them again, trying to force herself into reality. Her phone buzzed once more. Accept? Willa's hand shook. Her thumb hovered. She thought of the hospital. The endless need. The way people looked at her when they were afraid. She thought of how she'd always believed she chose this life. The voice from the hallway had said, "Someone is waiting." Willa hit accept. The instant her thumb touched the screen, the front door's deadbolt clicked open. The house exhaled. Sound returned. The distant hum of traffic, the neighbor's air conditioner, a dog barking somewhere down the block. Willa stood still, dizzy. Her phone screen changed to a map. Not a real map. A blank field with a single glowing dot and a line leading away from her house. At the bottom, text appeared. Patient ready. Do not delay. Willa's mouth went dry. She grabbed her keys and stumbled outside, the night air cold on her damp skin. Her street looked normal, quiet, empty. Her car started on the first try. The glowing line on her phone's map led her through streets she knew, then into areas she didn't. Industrial blocks, closed shops, a stretch of road along the river where streetlights flickered. At 3:12 a.m., she reached a building that looked abandoned, a small brick medical office with boarded windows. Her phone buzzed. Arrived. Willa sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles ached. This was insane. She should call the police, but she had the strange certainty that if she tried, the call wouldn't go through. She got out and walked to the building's side door. It was ajar. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and dust. The hallway was lit by dim emergency lights, casting everything in a greenish hue. Willa followed the map's line as if on a leash. At the end of the hallway, she found a room with an open door. Inside, under a single overhead light, a hospital bed sat waiting. Someone lay in it, covered in a sheet up to the chin. Willa stepped closer, pulse pounding. The person on the bed was a woman in her 70s, face pale, eyes open but unfocused. She breathed shallowly, each inhale a struggle. A heart monitor beside the bed beeped slowly, though there was no visible power source. Willa's nurse brain kicked in automatically. She checked the woman's pulse. Weak, thready, skin cold. "What is this?" Willa whispered. The woman's eyes shifted slightly, focusing on Willa's face. Her lips moved. No sound came out, but Willa understood anyway. The way you understand a patient's fear without words. Help. Willa looked around. No IV, no oxygen, no staff. Just her and this dying stranger in an abandoned clinic. Her phone buzzed. Intervention required. Time remaining. 3 minutes. Willa's breath caught. "I don't have equipment," she whispered. "I can't." The lights flickered. In the corner of the room, something stood. Not a person. Something wearing the idea of a person. A tall figure in a long coat, face smooth as blank paper. Its presence made the air feel too thin. Willa's heart hammered. She turned back to the woman, who was breathing faster now. Panic rising. Willa did what she always did. She acted. She positioned the woman's head, opened her airway. She searched the room and found a small oxygen tank tucked under a chair, as if placed there waiting. She strapped on the mask, turned the valve. Oxygen hissed softly. The woman's breathing eased slightly. Willa checked the monitor. The beeping stabilized. Her phone buzzed again. Good. Stay until relief. Willa swallowed hard. Whose relief? The figure in the corner didn't move, but Willa felt its attention sharpen. The woman in the bed turned her eyes toward the corner too, as if she could sense it. Her lips trembled. "No," she mouthed. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. Willa's skin crawled. The overhead light flickered and a second figure appeared by the door, identical in shape, as if printed from the same template. Then a third behind it. Willa's breath came fast. Her mind screamed to run, but the woman's hand, cold, thin, found Willa's wrist and gripped with surprising strength. "Don't leave," the woman's eyes begged. Willa looked at her, and something inside her broke in a quiet, weary way. She had spent her life being needed. She had built herself out of other people's emergencies. Now something else had noticed. It wanted her the way the hospital wanted her, the way patients wanted her, the way work had always wanted her, endlessly. Her phone buzzed again, relief arriving. The figures by the door stepped aside, not walking so much as allowing space to change. A person entered, actually human. A man in scrubs, mid-50s, tired eyes, carrying a stethoscope. He looked at Willa with recognition that made her stomach drop. "You're new," he said quietly. His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken much lately. "Who are you?" Willa whispered. He smiled without humor. Everett Finch, he said. Used to be an ER nurse. 6 months ago, I found a key on my counter and thought it was just a mistake. Willa's throat closed. How do I leave? Everett checked the patient's vitals with practiced speed. You can leave when they let you, he said. And they let you when you accept the work. I didn't know, Willa said, voice cracking. I didn't agree to this. Everett's eyes flicked toward the blank-faced figures in the corner. Doesn't matter, he said. They don't ask for consent. They ask for compliance. Willa's stomach turned. What happens if I refuse? Everett hesitated. You'll be locked in your house again, he said. And next time, the door won't open when you accept. Because they'll decide you're not useful anymore. They don't like waste. Willa looked at the patient, now breathing easier under oxygen, eyes still wet with fear. Willa's chest tightened. She thought of the countless times she'd stayed after her shift to help, because someone needed her. She thought of the way guilt had been woven into her life, like a second uniform. Everett finished and nodded. Go, he said softly, before they decide to keep you longer. Willa stumbled out of the room. The hallway seemed to guide her, turning where it needed to. The figures didn't follow, but she could feel them watching as if recording her. Outside, her car sat waiting, engine still warm. Her phone map showed the line back to her house. When she drove home, dawn began to lighten the sky. Everything looked ordinary, but Willa felt different, like a door had been opened inside her. At her house, the front door was unlocked. She stepped inside and locked it herself, hands shaking. On her bathroom mirror, condensation formed again, though the room was cold now. Letters appeared. Next shift. Tonight, you accepted once. You will again. Willa stared at the message until her eyes blurred. Then she wiped the mirror, but this time the words didn't vanish completely. A faint residue remained, like an imprint, like something filed into the glass. Willa sat down on the bathroom floor, back against the tub, and tried to breathe. She knew the truth now. Somewhere in the city, people were waiting in unseen rooms, and the ones who left were hungry for hands like hers. And the worst part was how quickly her nurse brain began to do what it always did. It started planning how to survive the next shift. Story 5. Desmond Ashford had never liked elevators. He didn't like the way they removed the simple logic of movement, turning travel into surrender. You stepped inside a box. The door closed. You trusted invisible cables and small systems you couldn't control. At 53, Desmond had learned to tolerate many things he didn't like. He tolerated the ache in his knees. He tolerated his own reflection in harsh lighting. He tolerated most days the knowledge that his life had narrowed into routines that were not quite living. His wife had died 2 years earlier. Sudden illness, fast decline, a cruel efficiency of the body. Afterward, the house felt too big. Every room a reminder of absence. So Desmond sold it and moved into a downtown high-rise in Boston, the kind of building with sleek hallways and quiet neighbors who avoided eye contact. He told himself he wanted a fresh start. Really, he wanted to be somewhere anonymous enough that grief wouldn't stick to him. The building was called the Aldridge. 25 stories of glass and concrete. A lobby that smelled faintly of expensive cleaner and perfume. A doorman who greeted residents by name with the practiced warmth of someone paid to be human. Desmond lived on the 19th floor. His apartment looked out over the river, lights glittering on water at night like scattered coins. The first week, the elevator behaved normally. The second week, it began to pause. Not dramatically, just small hesitations between floors, as if deciding. Desmond tried to ignore it. He told himself it was an old building. He told himself the city always had maintenance issues. He told himself he was imagining patterns because grief had trained his brain to look for meaning. Then, on a Thursday evening, he stepped into the elevator carrying a bag of groceries and pressed 19. The doors closed with their usual soft whisper. The elevator began to rise. It passed floor 5, 6, 7. At floor 8, it stopped. The doors did not open. The panel lights flickered. The ceiling lights dimmed slightly, then steadied. Desmond felt his throat tighten. He hated being trapped even for a moment. His hands tightened around the grocery bag handles until they cut into his palms. The elevator moved again. It passed 9, 10. At 11, it stopped again. Desmond exhaled slowly through his nose. Then, without warning, the elevator began to descend. Desmond's stomach dropped. He stared at the panel. The number changed. 10, 9, 8. He pressed the button for 19 again. Nothing. He pressed the door open button. Nothing. A faint hum filled the elevator, low and steady, like a distant machine. Desmond's heart hammered. "Hello," he called, voice sounding wrong in the small space. No response. The elevator continued descending past the lobby. It should not have been able to. Below the lobby were only 2 levels of parking garage. Desmond knew this. He'd parked there once. The number display changed to B1, then B2. Then it changed again, B3. Desmond's mouth went dry. The air in the elevator shifted. It grew colder, carrying a faint smell like dust and old carpet and something metallic, like coins left too long in a pocket. The number display continued. B4, B5. The grocery bag in Desmond's hands felt suddenly heavy. He swallowed hard. "This is a malfunction," he whispered, as if saying it aloud could make it true. The elevator slowed. The hum deepened. The number display went blank. For a moment there was only darkness and the sound of Desmond's breathing. Then, softly, a light came on above the doors. Not the usual warm fluorescent. A cold, white illumination that seemed to come from nowhere. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. Beyond was not a garage. It was a corridor, a long hallway lined with closed doors, each door painted a dull gray, each door identical. The corridor stretched into dimness, too long to exist beneath a Boston high-rise. The air beyond smelled like paper and metal and something faintly sweet like glue. Desmond stood frozen in the elevator, grocery bag trembling in his hands. The corridor was quiet, but not empty. He could feel a tension in it the way you can feel someone watching from behind. A small brass plaque was mounted on the wall directly across from the elevator doors. Desmond Ashford, age 53. Accountant Desmond's blood ran cold. His last name sat there like a mark. Ashford. He thought absurdly of Vera, the daughter he barely spoke to now, not because he didn't love her, but because grief had made him clumsy with love. Because every conversation felt like stepping on glass. Desmond backed away from the open doors. He pressed the close button repeatedly. Nothing. The elevator did not respond. He looked into the corridor again. Farther down faintly, he heard a sound like paper turning, slow and deliberate. Desmond swallowed hard. He stepped out of the elevator. The air outside was colder, dry enough to sting his nostrils. The elevator doors slid shut behind him with a soft finality. Desmond spun. He pressed the call button. No light, no sound. The elevator was gone. His breath came fast. Panic rose in his throat, hot and sharp. He forced himself to inhale slowly. He had survived his wife's death. He had survived the paperwork, the hospital corridors, the days when grief made the world feel unreal. He could survive a hallway. He began to walk, shoes echoing softly on the floor. The corridor walls were smooth and clean, painted like office space. The ceiling lights were evenly spaced, but their illumination didn't reach the corners. Desmond approached the nearest door. A brass plaque. Margot Strand, age 40. Nurse. His stomach twisted. Another door. Felix Rourke, age 64, locksmith. Desmond's pulse pounded. He kept walking, reading plaques like involuntary prayer. Names, ages, occupations, and beneath some, a second line in smaller text. Moved out, removed. Reassigned. Desmond's mouth went dry. He realized with slow horror that this was not a hallway in a building. It was a registry, a place that kept track. He reached a door with no plaque, just blank paint. Then another. Then far down, he saw something that made him stop. A door with a plaque that read, Elliot Brennan, age 31, sound technician, beneath it, pending. The word pending made Desmond's skin crawl. Pending what? Pending removal. Pending something being finalized. He heard the page turning sound again. Closer now. Desmond turned slowly. At the far end of the corridor, something stood. Not quite a person. A shape too tall, too still. It looked like a figure in a long coat, but the face was indistinct, as if blurred by frosted glass. It did not move, but Desmond felt its attention like pressure. His mouth went dry. "What do you want?" he whispered. The figure's head tilted slightly. The air seemed to tighten. Then Desmond understood, not through sound, but through meaning. "You entered below. You are now listed." Desmond's breath caught. "I didn't. I just got in the wrong elevator." The figure didn't respond in words. It simply stood, and the corridor around it seemed to become more defined, as if the place was deciding what Desmond was. Desmond backed away, scanning for another exit, another elevator, anything. As he moved, he noticed something else. The plaques were not fixed. On one door, the second line had changed while he watched. The letters shifted like ink rearranging. Reassigned became returned. Desmond's chest tightened. He thought of his wife again. How quickly a person could become a record. A name on a certificate. A file in a system. He thought of his own life narrowing into paperwork. This corridor felt like grief made architecture. Desmond turned and ran. The corridor seemed to lengthen as he ran, doors stretching into the distance. The air resisted, dry and heavy. He reached a junction, 2 hallways branching. He chose left without thinking. The new hallway was identical. More doors, more plaques. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs ached, until he realized he wasn't getting anywhere. The corridor was not a place you escaped by running. It was a place you escaped by being removed from the list. Desmond stopped, panting, and leaned against the wall. His grocery bag hung from his hand, forgotten. The bag crinkled softly. In the silence, the sound was too loud. Desmond stared at the bag and felt a sudden, desperate urge to laugh. Of all things to bring into a nightmare corridor, milk, bread, apples. He set the bag down. The corridor lights flickered. In the brief dimness, he saw doors opening along the hallway. Quiet, soft clicks like locks turning. Desmond's heart hammered. He looked down the corridor. Figures stood in doorways now, blurred, indistinct, shaped like people but wrong. They watched him with the patient attention of a system waiting for input. Desmond's mouth went dry. He tried to speak, but his throat closed. A sound came from behind him. The soft ding of an elevator. Desmond spun. An elevator door stood open where there had been only wall. Inside, the elevator lights glowed warm and normal. Desmond stared, hope surging so fast it almost hurt. He stepped forward. A brass plaque was mounted beside the elevator door. Vera Ashford, age 27, records manager. Desmond's breath stopped. His daughter's name. He stared at the plaque, mind blank with shock. Behind him, the figures remained in their doorways, watching. Desmond understood suddenly, with a clarity so sharp it felt like pain. The corridor was not random. It was not just a place people stumbled into. It was connected. It could list family. It could reach through names like wires. Desmond's phone buzzed in his pocket. He fumbled it out with shaking hands. A text from Vera. "Dad, are you awake?" Desmond stared at the message. His throat tightened. He hadn't heard from her in days, weeks sometimes. He typed with trembling fingers. "Vera, where are you?" The reply came quickly. "I'm at home. Why?" Desmond's chest tightened. He stared at the elevator plaque again. How could she be home and also have an elevator door here? Unless the corridor was not a physical place. Unless it was a layer beneath reality that could open in different buildings, different walls, different seams. Desmond typed, "Listen to me. If you ever find a door in your wall that shouldn't be there, don't open it." 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then appeared again, as if she were typing and deleting. Finally, "Dad, what are you talking about?" Desmond's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped his phone. Behind him, the corridor figures began to step closer without walking, distance collapsing the way it had in other thin places. Desmond looked at the open elevator. Warm light, normality. But the plaque with Vera's name beside it felt like a hook. If he stepped into that elevator, where would it take him? To Vera? Or to the part of Vera that had been listed? Desmond's mind raced. He felt the weight of every mistake he'd made with his daughter, every time grief had made him silent, every time he'd avoided connection because it hurt. Now connection was here, offered by something that didn't understand love, only lists. Desmond took a step toward the elevator. The warm light inside looked inviting in a way that made his stomach twist. He heard faintly the sound of paper turning. A message formed in his mind, not spoken but understood. "Payment is proximity. We keep what you come for." Desmond stopped. He thought of Vera's voice, of how she'd sounded at the funeral, careful and controlled, as if trying not to break. He'd wanted to reach for her then, and hadn't known how. Now the corridor offered him a way to reach. But it wasn't mercy. It was capture. Desmond backed away from the elevator, shaking. He looked down at his phone and typed, "I'm sorry. I should have called more. I'm sorry." The message sent. No reply. The elevator light dimmed slightly, as if disappointed. The figures in the corridor leaned closer. Desmond's throat closed. He couldn't think. Panic surged. Then he did the only thing he could. He said Vera's name aloud, not as a list entry, not as a plaque, but as a prayer. "Vera," he whispered, "please don't come looking for me." The corridor lights flickered violently. For a moment, Desmond saw the hallway split into multiple versions, doors shifting, plaques changing like rewritten records. He saw Vera's name appear on more than one plaque, multiplying like paperwork. Then the world snapped. Desmond stumbled and fell forward onto carpet. He was in his building's lobby. The doorman looked up, startled. "Mr. Ashford, are you okay?" Desmond lay on the lobby floor, heart pounding. The air smelled of cleaner and perfume. Ordinary. Real. He pushed himself up shakily. His grocery bag was beside him, intact. He looked at his hands. They were trembling. He looked toward the elevator bank. The doors were closed, silent. Desmond swallowed hard. "Yes," he managed. "I just got dizzy." The doorman frowned. "You sure? You were in the elevator a minute ago, and then—" He hesitated, as if unsure how to describe it. "Then you weren't." Desmond's skin went cold. "What do you mean?" The doorman shook his head, unsettled. "I looked down at the screen and it said B something, but we only have B1 and B2. Desmond's mouth went dry. He stumbled toward the stairs instead of the elevator. His knees shook as he climbed 19 flights, breath ragged. Inside his apartment, he locked the door and slid the chain. He pressed his back to the wood and tried to breathe. His phone buzzed. A text from Vera. "Dad, you scared me. Are you okay?" Desmond stared at the words until tears blurred them. He typed, "I'm okay. I'm sorry. I love you." This time, 3 dots appeared quickly. Then Vera replied, "I love you too. Please don't disappear on me." Desmond's throat closed. He sat down on the floor by the door, shaking. He looked at his keyring on the small table by the entry. Attached to it somehow was a new brass tag he'd never seen before. Desmond Ashford listed. His mouth tasted like pennies. Desmond understood then that escape wasn't the same as being free. The corridor had let him go, but it had kept his name. And now, every time he stepped toward an elevator, every time he stood before a door, he would feel that thin shift in silence and wonder whether the building would decide it was time to file him away again. He texted Vera one more time, hands shaking. "If anything strange happens in your apartment, call me. Don't handle it alone." Vera replied immediately, "Okay, I promise." Desmond stared at the word promise until it lost meaning. Then he turned off every light and sat in the dark, listening to the building's ordinary noises, trying to convince himself that ordinary still existed. In the silence between sounds, he heard something else. A soft, deliberate page turning. Not in his apartment, inside the walls, and Desmond Ashford, listed and waiting, understood with cold certainty that the system beneath the building was still reading him, still revising his edges, still deciding when to keep him for good. Thank you for spending this time with me, here in the quiet where stories can feel like company and the dark feels a little less lonely. If any of tonight's moments linger, if you find yourself listening for the subtle shift in silence or noticing how a hallway can feel too long, let them pass through you gently. You don't have to hold them. If you enjoyed this and you'd like to return tomorrow night, you're welcome to subscribe and join us again. No pressure, just an open door, the ordinary kind. For now, drink a little water if you can. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow. Sleep well. Dream peacefully. And if something in the dark feels like it's watching, remember that you're here, and you're safe, and this has been the Stillness Broadcast.